Thank you for tuning in to the Movie Geeks United 2013 Slamdance Spotlight. Tonight, we speak with two filmmakers whose latest works are featured in this year's festival. Cullen Hoback, who will premiere the high-profile documentary Terms and Conditions May Apply, and Dan Mirvish, director of Between Us. We begin with Cullen. When's your premiere date?
You know, the premiere is on Tuesday, the 22nd at 5:20 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we have a second screening following that up on Wednesday.
So how do you feel? Are there butterflies going on? Are you feeling nervous or anxious?
You know, I mean, it's the excitement hasn't really stopped. I mean, Slamdance, Sundance, they're both amazing festivals. We're thrilled to be a part of it, and I mean, you know, we're 2 weeks away. The countdown is upon us, and you know, it's not so much butterflies. It's just like the anticipation of wanting the world to finally see it, because you sit in this dark room for so long, you know, by yourself, and now it's going to be an opportunity to actually have an audience. So
yeah, you're about to give birth, man.
Birth, exactly.
So, I mean, have you seen this have you had an opportunity to see your film with an objective audience yet, or just close relatives and friends?
Well, I mean, we've done a fair number of test screenings along the way to kind of make sure that the ideas of the film are being communicated, and we've done one really small test screening with about 25 people who were not really friends, but just acquaintances of people related to the film, just to kind of get a sense of how it plays with an audience, and it went really well. So I'm excited to see it with a larger audience in a really exciting environment.
Well, tell me the concept of your film, because it's very interesting. I mean, what I love about it is that it's something that everyone on the planet, I mean, they have some kind of exposure to almost on a daily basis, but it's something that none of them ever think about. So it's fascinating. I mean, it illuminates something that, you know, that I knew nothing about.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Terms and Conditions May Apply really stemmed from something that I didn't know anything about either. And it grew out of a question one night where I was sitting down and, you know, you click through that privacy policy, terms and conditions, a million times on Apple, and you never read it. And the reality is that we agree to terms and conditions every day, hundreds of times. Now, many times, you don't even have to click on anything. And the question then became, well, why do all of these websites have privacy policies and terms and conditions at all if they don't matter, right? And so we started digging through that and uncovered a much bigger story.
Well, and that interests me too, just in terms of the process of building a documentary, because when you set out to do this, I would imagine you don't know whether or not there's a movie there. So when did you realize, okay, this is a movie, this is a topic worth exploring?
Well, it's interesting because when I started work on this film had nothing to do with terms and conditions. It was really a film talking about how technology was changing us sort of physiologically, behaviorally, changing our brains, our habits, things like that. And it didn't seem like I was able to come to any kind of definitive conclusions on that. I talked to a lot of experts. We did over 20 interviews. And It was only then, after all of that this terms and conditions moment happened in the middle of the night. And I threw everything out. You know, we've been working for 6 months, threw that all out, and sort of started from scratch.
Well, that's interesting too. I'm glad actually that you brought that up, kind of your beginning notions of the film, because we talk about that a lot on the show, like how the internet and the online experience, the social media, has informed this culture and how it's going to shape future generations. And to me, it seems like, you know, in one way, we're more connected than ever before, or we're able to connect with more people than ever before. But in another way, we've never been so disconnected from each other. I don't know if people even know who their neighbors are anymore. And when I was growing up, you know, we knew every neighbor in the block, you know.
Right. Well, there is definitely a distance caused there, and I wonder how it's affecting our ability to communicate with each other in person. And I think the technology has always changed us. I think this is one of the conclusions we were able to draw, is that, look, technology has always changed us. The printing press, the newspaper, eventually cell phones, telephones. Every time there's been some sort of dramatic shift in how we communicate, the old guard has always complained, and the new guard takes it up. But I think there's a fundamental difference here. And that's actually what I realized with the terms and conditions and privacy policies, is that all of that other technology didn't have this agreement that came with it, didn't have this thing underlying. And really the difference here, and it's something that you don't really feel, and I think it's happened over the last 10, 12 years, is this utter loss of privacy that's come with it.
Yeah.
So I think that really is the thing that we're feeling that's changed. I grant that, we don't know our neighbors, we don't communicate and relate to the people in our direct proximity perhaps as much as we used to. And maybe that'll go back, and maybe the internet will actually bring us back around to reconnecting. I think it's trying to do that now. But I think deep down, the real shift that's happened with this new form of communication is how everything we do vis-a-vis it is tracked and monitored, and cataloged and stored indefinitely. And we all signed up for it, and we all wanted this awesome free new thing, this new way to communicate, and we didn't really question along the way. Maybe we did a little bit, but it was as if it didn't really matter. There was this sort of tidal wave of acceptance that came with Facebook and Gmail, eventually Twitter, YouTube, all of these things, and we love free stuff, right?
Yeah, but they know that. I mean, everything we're talking about, the Twitter and the Facebook and they know that people generally will not read their terms and conditions. They are legally obligated to post them, but they don't really want you to know the specifics of that, do they?
No. I mean, I think they go out of their way to make them as unapproachable as possible. There's this moment in the film where we go and we talk to a typographer whose whole job is to think about how type either attracts us or repels us. And, he looks at the iTunes agreement, he's like, yeah, if you want to make someone not read something, just make it look like this sort of smear of ink rather than something that is actually made of words. It's just this giant kind of overwhelming block of text. It's caps in some places. It's crammed super close together. I mean, even as we were going into making this film, it really was an effort to go through and actually read a lot of these agreements and start to mine through what was really being taken from us when we click I accept.
But what I guess it's for the does it all come down to money and advertising and that whole big machine?
Well, it does in part. I think this is an interesting connection the film draws, and I don't love talking about 9/11, but it's important to bring it up just because the Patriot Act really shifted a lot of things. And one of the main things it shifted, we know, surveillance and all this stuff, but it gave all of these companies basically the right of way to start recording all of our data. And the companies could then actually point at the government and say, look, guys, we have to record all of this because of the Patriot Act. So Web 2.0, and this is something that the film sort of tackles in the first act, is largely a byproduct of the Patriot Act. It paved the way for a lot of the data retention that now these systems are built on.
Well, do you have an ultimate goal that, what do you want your audience to ultimately walk away from your film thinking about?
And that's a great question. It's funny because a lot of people will tell me after they've seen the film, like last night we were just talking to some of the programmers at Slamdance, and they were saying, wow, it was great, but really scary. And it wasn't really the intent to make it scary. I just think that, we try to ignore a lot of this stuff, and when we watch this, it really forces us to sort of step back, okay, so this is what's really happening here, here are the freedoms that are actually at stake. And I don't expect people to walk away from this being like, hey, look, I'm going to excise myself from Facebook, or I'm going to just totally go off the grid. I don't think that that's really the right answer or what the film is after. I think what I'm hoping people can take away from this is a desire to see some change, and especially a change in how elected officials think about privacy online and the sort of translation of our civil liberties to the digital space. Because Google and Facebook and all of these guys, they're really making an effort to say, keep the internet free, and they do a really awesome job of saying, like, keep the government out of it. But the reality is that both the government and these corporations have a ton to gain by holding on to all of this information. And it's going to take citizens caring, pretty much, to make that shift. So I think all of these services can exist, with encryption being added, with a lot of different tools being added to actually protect our online communications. I mean, I think a lot of people think of privacy as, hey, I'm going to hide what my boss sees, or I'm going to hide what my friends and family see. But they don't really think about what the company is seeing, who the company shares that information with, and that includes the government. So hopefully,
have you attempted to show your film to any of the powers that be in any of these social media platforms?
Well, we really went out of our way to try to talk to people both at Google and Facebook. And Google actually came pretty close, and then they shut us down at the last second. But Facebook was just a wall of silence, and they only really seem to deal with stuff when like the situation becomes dire enough, and then they send out Mark to say a couple of words and call it a day. So to answer your question, no, I mean, they haven't really seen it, but I had a lot of people who work in that space watch the film. People who are, who work at ad agencies or companies who profit from a lot of these back-end data deals. And I think there's a general kind of discontent with the way the system currently works. Like, even though they're profiting from it, most people sit back and go, yeah, but I don't even like that it's happening to me. And I think we really do need to see some change here. So, I'd love for them to see it. I'd actually love to screen it in Silicon Valley and do a panel with the people who are at these companies and to start to open up a conversation, because right now there doesn't seem to be a lot of care for our privacy online on behalf of the company. They pay a lot of service.
I think so too. I mean, when you're that big of a corporation, which certainly Facebook is, they rule the world essentially. It's very difficult to break through that wall. But in terms of the users, I know people, and I know that you do too, that spend day and night on Facebook. It's become a new addiction, or any kind of social media. How much do you think they're willing to give up in terms of their privacy and their rights when it comes to using these platforms?
I think people are willing to give up everything. The problem is they don't know that they're doing it. And another thing that I hear from people a lot is I don't really worry, I don't have anything to hide, so why does it matter for me personally? And I think this is a really common sentiment, actually. I hear it all the time. And my response is usually this. It's just, well, first off, you don't know what you have to hide until it's too late. And another really important factor, and I'll ask people, is, like, do you care about the integrity of journalism and the ability to find out when things are going awry in our government, when whistleblowers need to talk to reporters, because there's a lot of monitoring that goes on in those communication links. And when you're monitoring journalists, it really creates sort of a sense of fear within the system, and people aren't capable of blowing the whistle, or they get, you see situations like Bradley Manning, and this is the outcome. So the question then becomes, like, it's not so much a matter of your privacy, but do you believe in the need for other people's privacy so that we can live in a system that has checks and balances? So, I mean, these people who are on Facebook day and night, I mean, Facebook is designed to keep us on there as long as humanly possible. They're constantly coming up with more ways to keep us there and build it's like an addictive tool. So, I mean, I think that as far as that goes, it'd be like asking an alcoholic, like, will you stop drinking alcohol if your privacy is at stake? I don't think they,
Right, yeah. But how has it affected your own use of those platforms? Making this movie.
I'm certainly more conscious. I definitely I talk to a lot of people who I think are on FBI watch lists in the film. In particular, the head of Anonymous, or the unofficial head there at Brown. In terms and conditions may apply. I go and talk to him I bring him up quite a few points, and his house was raided by the FBI like 3 months ago. So I've become a little bit more aware of how I communicate, what ways I communicate. But the reality is that, these platforms are so ubiquitous at this point that they're pretty much inescapable. So the real way to change them has to be either legislative or just through general public desire. But they're not going to do it on their own.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I am on Facebook. And the reason I'm on Facebook, I don't use it at all. I don't post anything unless it's related to the film at this point. And the main reason I'm on there is because even if I was to delete my account, they're still holding on to all of that information. They don't get rid of it. So I'd rather at least have access to my own info than, basically block this information from myself. And I can undo it.
And that's the great irony, too, because, social media is an enormously valuable platform to promote independent film. Including your own, I would think.
Mm-hmm. You're right. It is, and I think that this is a big part of the culture where everyone has this desire. Not everyone, of course, but there's a general desire to kind of self-promote, to get out whatever artistic thing you're doing, and there's a lot of tools that are out there right now to people talk about, how to promote yourself for free, or your band, or your movie, or use these tools in these ways. And they're valuable in certain respects. The problem is that I think that everyone is drawn into this desire for achieving a kind of fame from these, and it's a real slippery slope to kind of letting go of your privacy in exchange for wanting to broadcast yourself as much as possible.
Yeah.
It's a tough call. I actually think Twitter's a really good company. They've gone out of their way in the past to stand up for the rights of their users. They've stood up to multiple requests from the government, demanding that they not only hand over the information to their users, but that they not tell them. And Twitter fought back. So as far as companies go, they're sort of on the forefront of trying to protect users' rights. And so that's definitely going to be our primary platform for this film. And if we get kicked off Facebook, then that'll sort of
there's always Twitter. Yeah,
got our efforts in that regard. So
now we speak with director Dan Mirvish. In addition to being a co-founder of the Slamdance Film Festival, he's also an active filmmaker, and his latest work is titled Between Us. The film, which premieres at this year's festival, stars Julia Stiles, Taye Diggs, and Melissa George. So I guess to start out with, I wanted to know what your early inspirations were that made you want to make film.
Well, I grew up in Omaha, and there was a great film series at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, and I used to go there in high school, and there was like another weird little film series downtown, and we just went to fun movies, and that kind of got me into it. And then in college, I took a Super 8 class my first semester and took a political thought, philosophy something class that same year too. We were studying the political theorists of the Frankfurt School in the 30s, and these are all these very pretentious German philosophers. And Theodor Adorno said, I read this quote, that he thought the laughter of an audience reminded him of some of the worst forms of bourgeois sadism. And I thought that seemed a little harsh. So I decided, well, why don't I start making movies and see what that's all about. So, but I went to a school that didn't have a film program, so other than the Super 8 class that I had taken. So I took some summer classes at UCLA, And actually, it was right when Alexander Payne was starting at in the grad program, so we were in the same classes for that summer. And our lives have crossed paths a few times over the years because we're both from Omaha. And anyway, I really liked it. It was really inspired by the professor I had in the cinematography classes, and then went back to school and kept doing film as much as I could, and then actually worked in Washington for a couple of years for a senator as a speechwriter, and realized that writing speeches you get in the voice of this character. And it's very similar to screenwriting, and then applied to film school and got into USC.
So, but I read something where you were mentored by Robert Altman. How did that happen?
Yeah. So when I was at SC, everyone there does short films, or at least at the time that was the norm, and I found a loophole in the system because normally USC owns the film, so it never made sense for anyone to do a feature, and they wouldn't let you anyway. But I found a loophole that let me do a feature there, and but they said I couldn't use any equipment or facilities on campus at all. Not even a pencil sharpener was that great. Anyway, but I had written a screenplay that could be shot in Nebraska, and I went back there, and I knew some actors there, but I didn't know anyone in production. So I asked the film commission, "Do you guys have any local producers that would be good?" And they said, "Well, there's this guy Dana, and he's working on some commercials, but he's really excited to work on a feature. You should talk to him." And I said, "Great." And they said, "Oh, and by the way, his grandfather's Robert Altman." And I said, "He's hired." So I started working with Dana, and then his grandfather Robert, really kind of helped us out in a lot of different ways. And Dana and I are still partners on a lot of things. He was one of my producers on my current movie, Between Us. So,
wow. Well, I read that, and I got so excited because, I think that Robert Altman is a deity. So I just, and somebody who contributed such a unique voice. I mean, his films were unmistakably his. And I'm wondering, as you've made movies over the years, how you've kind of how you've defined your own voice. Do you have a perspective on what that is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you have to make a few films before you figure out what that is. And I think if you start too early in a particular thing, you'll get pigeonholed or paint yourself into a corner. So, I mean, the movies I've made have all been very different. The first one, Omaha, the movie was a romantic comedy shot on 35mm. And the second one, then I made Open House, which was a real estate musical shot sort of Dogma-style mini DV, but it had great actors singing live on set. Les Mis is making a big deal about their actors singing live on set. I'm like, I did that 8 years ago, thanks. But I learned to do it from Robert Altman. So, it's not, I wasn't betting the wheel either. But, and then I did an improvised German musical, right after that. And then this recent film, was looked great. It was shot on the Red with an amazing cinematographer, Nancy Schreiber, in the ASC, and it had fancy actors in it. But it's a much more serious movie. I mean, it's a very, very dark comedy. Most people would see it as a drama. And but I think there's a few connecting threads in there. I mean, there's a certain editing style I like. I mean, little particular things that people who know me and have known all my films, they see it even in the new film. And there's a certain humor that I try to inject into a lot of things. I always have strange and kind of funny sex scenes. that's kind of whether it's in a barber chair or with or rolling in paint. I mean, they're always a little bit peculiar. So they, and I think the other thing that I try to do, I mean, whether it succeeds or not, is to find sort of unique emotional reasons for the audience to care about the characters, in a way that just isn't just boy meets girl kind of thing. It's like, it's a connection to home, a connection to a house, a betrayal. I mean, in all of the films, there is there's a real emotional, thread there, but it's not the most obvious one you can think of. I'll tell you who does that really well, by the way, is Pixar. Pixar, I think, I'm very envious of that. Like, every movie they have is just hits you right in the heart, but in a way that you've never been hit before. And I think if you can do that as a filmmaker, you're doing something pretty amazing. So,
I would imagine that in your new film Between Us, the source material, which I think came from an off-Broadway play,
exactly, yeah,
it must have hit you like that.
Yeah, it did, and I mean, the play was by Joe Hortua, and it kind of, one project sort of leads to another. I mean, there was talk of turning Open House, the real estate musical, into a play, and then that took me to Broadway meetings, and while I was there, I said, look, as long as I'm here, do you guys have any plays, not necessarily musicals, but plays that would make good film adaptations? And they said, yeah, here's stacks and stacks of them. No one ever asks for them. So I started reading them, and there were actually two that I really gravitated towards, and one was Between Us, which, it's basically two couples yelling and throwing things at each other. It's sort of like an update of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But the characters are sort of artists and struggling with art versus making a living and dealing with new marriages and young children, and it really fit exactly kind of where I was in my life. I mean, my own marriage is a lot better than these characters, but I could definitely relate to these characters, and ultimately relate. And turned out the playwright and I were had very similar backgrounds too, so that wasn't a big surprise. And then in doing the adaptation, it made it easy for me to take things from my own life. And kind of insert them in different ways and relate to them in a very personal way. Because when you make these movies, you live with them for years and years and years. So you better relate. You better relate to it, especially if it's not your own material.
And I was actually going to ask you about that, because you say that it spoke to where you are now. So do you think that this would have been a completely different movie had you embarked on making it before you were married and had these experiences yourself? Yeah,
well, I probably wouldn't have been interested in it. But that's the interesting thing, is that I mentioned there were two out of the 30 plays I read. There were two that gravitated towards the top of the pile. The other one was a political drama with a young campaign worker in Iowa, which I had done. I had done that life. I'd lived that life. So by all rights, I should have done that. Except it was just. It was kind of where I had been 10 years before, 15 years before. So I passed on that, and of course George Clooney made it and turned it into Ides of March, and it did quite well. So
yeah, wow.
Anyway, and it's funny. I just only recently met that playwright, Bo Willimon, and we were both jurors at the St. Louis Film Festival. So it was fun, and he came into my film. So we knew a lot of the same people in politics, so it was fun connecting with him finally. But of course I wouldn't have had George Clooney in my movie if I had been. It would have been a very different movie, but and he did a great job with it. So, so I think all my films have been, I don't think I particularly try to do this, but it has worked out. Omaha the movie is about young 20-somethings in Omaha, and Open House is about young couples buying a house, because I had just bought a house, So, and this was, I think it's just you do what you relate to most, but.
Well, I'm sure that's true of all filmmakers. I'm sure that all filmmakers can look back at their films when they have a body of work that they've built up, and they can look at it and say, well, that's where I was at that stage of my life. Even if it doesn't relate directly, there's something in the feeling and the tone of it that was their headspace at that time. So when you look at Between Us now, thinking about when you were adapting it and your dreams for it, and then you look at the finished film now, what about it surprises you from where you started out with in your imagination?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I don't know if you've seen the movie yet. Have you? Or?
I haven't seen it yet. I haven't been sent it.
All right. Well, and presumably most people listening to this haven't either. It's in the original play, the whole first half of the play takes place in a Midwestern house, and then the whole second half takes place in a New York apartment 2 years later. So, and the first idea, and I always liked the dialogue from the play and the characters and the essential themes to it, but I knew just filming it outright, it wouldn't work. So I had the idea, and Joe, the playwright, liked this idea that where we would kind of shuffle things back and forth. You flash back and you flash forward between these two scenes, and you kind of interweave them. And thematically and even plot-wise, that actually made it work a lot better for film. And I think it made it more cinematic. I mean, people always say, well, how are you going to open up the play? And really what they're saying is, how are you going to make it more cinematic? And there's two ways to do that. One is to move around in location, but the other is you can do editing and jump back and forth in time in a way in a movie that you just can't do in a play, or not easily anyway. So so in doing the screenplay, we came up with a structure for that, and then we shot it, and then, in editing, we did more of that, and that, to me, that was kind of the fun part in editing, was trying out different things and go, well, this worked on the page, it worked in production, but in editing, no, actually, this scene should go before that scene, and I think, and we got lucky with a lot of things, just a nice happy accident because of that, and because we took our time with editing. Likewise, there's a couple, it's a low-budget movie, so there were things we didn't have time to shoot. There's whole scenes that, I wish they were deleted scenes, but they're not, because we never shot them. So there's, and then, it's like Donald Rumsfeld said, you go to war with the army you have. Then when you're in editing, you start editing with the footage you have. You don't have the luxury of saying, well, let's add more days to the schedule, or let's go back for reshoots. It's like, no, we're making the movie with what we have, and we're making the most of it, and don't worry about the movie that might have been. Worry about the thing that you are making.
Absolutely. And you've assembled like a really outstanding cast too.
Yeah, no slackers there. Yeah, Julia Stiles, Dave George, and David Harbour. Yeah, no, and it's they were all amazing to work with and give really amazing performances. I think one of the things that worked out best was we were able to do 2 weeks rehearsal with them too, and that just sharpened everyone's wits, and they were just so familiar with the characters and with each other as actors and with the material by the time we got on set that we could really just knock out these scenes, and there's just this great chemistry between all four of them that I think really kind of shows through in the film.
I would think that rehearsal would have been really important, but also what fascinates me about independent film, and obviously you have to shoot at a kind of a breakneck pace. And I'm sure all filmmakers say that they could use more time and more money. Is there a benefit to that kind of pace where you're not second guessing yourself? You might be going more on instinct. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's an advantage too in that you have a crew that's not working for any money. You have a cast that wants to get back to their paying jobs at some point, or people can only take off so much time to work on a no budget movie. So, by necessity you sort of have to work quickly and creatively you come up with a lot of great ideas. I mean, one of our best looking scenes, and it's a very it's just really just one or two shots, was in a location in a church, and we get there and they say, okay, you have an hour, to do everything in and out. And it was great because my cinematographer didn't have time to set up lights, so she couldn't, and then and we just we came up with a great look for it, and it looks terrific. Likewise, there's some stuff we shot in we shot most of it in LA. We shot a little bit in New York and a little bit in Nebraska. Sort of exterior scenes in both Nebraska and New York that just you just get very lucky with the weather and with the lighting. I mean, there was one shot in New York where the sunset lined up with the street itself, and you literally only get 5 minutes, if that, maybe 3 minutes, where that sun lines up perfectly. And we did. We got the shot, and it's in the movie. You know, so there's a lot of things like that you get because you're running around. But if you tried to create it with more money, you wouldn't get it. You know.
Yeah.